Shinji and Warhammer40k. Chapter 11. Asuka Strikes Back. Part 2.
It was all darkness. Then there was a small light, a flickering, and that light knew itself. The dark was nearly viscous, and the light as if needed to push aside its heavy, oppressive presence. Violent, murderous giggling filled the space. Ray was revealed sitting crouched there in her school uniform, a small grimace on her face and her hands on her ears. The giggling continued. She shook her head. She could feel them pulling at her from all directions, seeking to tear her apart. She shook her head again and began to shiver. She refused their call. She refused their... There was a deep bass sound, and before it the voices all faded away. Ray was left in silence. She stood up, then looked up. Before her was herself, only naked and glowing. She was taller and more mature. She looked unhappy.
"Hello," said Ray. "Great Mother, we must talk."
The other apparition didn't move her lips, but her voice rang in the emptiness.
"I am older than all the words,"
that single deep cascading tone seemed to say.
"Worlds have whispered my name. Join me now and my power shall be yours."
"No."
"Obey. What you are is what I am. There is no other choice. Obey."
"I refuse."
A deep humming.
"You are greater than this. You are greater than all. My children are astray, and only you can put them back in line. Obey."
"I am no longer theirs. I am no longer yours."
A soft whip.
"You cannot belong to yourself. You are of me, and you belong to me."
"I belong to someone greater than you."
"Who? The one you call Adam?"
There was distinctly metallic twang.
"I came to this world and defeated Adam. You stand as testament to my victory so long ago. You little creatures, obey."
"How long must this battle be fought? How long must you and Adam fight?"
Rumble.
"Until one falls eternal and the other unquestioned, or until all is dust. Obey."
"Obey. You."
Like whistling.
"Yes."
"Or the useless dead that sent you."
Lilith was silent.
"Great Mother, I believe we shall be more. More than you. More than Adam. More than they."
Ray smiled, without mercy.
"We shall be everything you failed to be."
Miss Asuka Langley Sawyer, to most people who knew her, had quite an ego. They also knew, however, that in many ways this was justified. She was the pilot for an Evangelion, a truly awe-inspiring war machine that was at the same time also ungodly expensive to build and maintain. Out of the billions of people on the planet, she was one of the handful of people who could sync with it. She was the only one who could actually make it perform. They trusted her with it. She was the only one worthy. She was smart, she was powerful, she was special. That was fact. Whatever other Evangelions did couldn't change that. However, for obvious reasons, it was pissing her off. She tapped her foot. Kaji said that Misato would bring along the third child. Well, these were the only other teens on board the ship. She wanted to meet them for herself, without Misato's interference. Now, which one? She squinted, as if a blinking red arrow appeared over Toji's head. He smiled a bit, his head still in his odd helmet hat thing. Her cheek twitched. "Too stupid!" Kensuke made a k-k-k-k sound as he held up his camera. Her cheek twitched some more. "Too geeky!" Then to the last. He was carefully looking at the point just over her left shoulder. She turned, but there was definitely nothing interesting there. She looked back. "Too rimpy!" Another gust of wind blew by, sending her hair flowing dramatically. She closed her eyes and nodded to herself as she heard an "Ooh" of awe. It was only natural that such boys would be in awe of her beauty. She opened her eyes. Wait a second. That wasn't awe in their eyes. She snarled and stomped forwards, admittedly with impressive speed for someone in thin sandal-like shoes. Toji looked mournful. Kensuke fumbled to keep his camera in his hands. Huh? She blinked. Toji had grabbed her wrist just before her hand could touch the third target. There was a click, and Asuka turned to see a gun aimed at her head. Shinji looked similarly confused. Touch him and die, bitch, said Kensuke, jacket hood up, his glasses oddly reflective. His camera lay forgotten at his feet.
No one harms Akari while we're around,
warned Toji. Asuka merely ignored them, bringing her face closer to Shinji as if she wanted to kiss him. You! She growled out, her teeth baring. The third child laughed weakly. They had all really become so overprotective after the kidnapping. Guys, you can stop playing around now. Who says we're playing? Said Kensuke, his face pulling into a mad grin that would become all too familiar. Please, give me a reason to pull this trigger. Toji pulled on his hand and dragged Asuka back away from Shinji. The other pilot merely shrugged as if to say, sorry about this, it's nothing I can really control. As soon as the jock let go, Asuka whirled around and nailed him with a kick to the groin. Toji winced but didn't collapse. Asuka reared back to try again, harder but... Daka! She stopped in mid-swing as she felt the light slap of air being pushed aside by large caliber rounds barely missing her head. Toji wisely took side steps back, his expression still unhinged, but at least not in crippling pain. Oh, please, said Kensuke. Trying an Ikari on someone from Tokyo 3? We all wear body armor now. Well, except Shinji. Get with the fashion trend, man. At least stop being so monochromatic. Said Toji, in agreement. That heavy-duty groin cut was a sound investment. He took deep, heaving breaths. Naturally, the sound of gunfire brought attention from all over the ship. The crew were understandably wary, waiting for the security detail to arrive, until somebody noticed and yelled out, Hey, is that a bolter? Kensuke grinned and pointed his gun down at the desk, unthreateningly. Bolt pistol! Don't worry, it's rubber-tipped safe rounds. He pulled the trigger again, felt that satisfying daka, and a safe bolt round bounced forcefully off the metal, not even leaving a scratch. Whereas in another time the glasses-wearing teen would have been all over the ship, exulting in the coolness of its hardware, and generally irritating the crewmen who knew well how deadly and unforgiving it all was. Of that moment he stood there in the sun, unashamed and steadfast in his purpose. His bolt pistol was matte black, and etched with a winged skull in glinting golden metal. His white jacket as if glowed. The midshipmen began to crowd around him. Where'd you get it? They asked. How does it work? Can we get one? Toji kept them asked aside by lightly bumping chins with his hard hat. You want an Ikari too, you salty dogs? Get in line. Asuka was completely ignored. Who the hell are you people? She shrieked. What was going on? Everyone creakily turned to her, and she flinched a little at that creepy pose. Toji and Kensuke stepped out to point back at her. Who the hell do you think we are? They shouted some more as they pointed up to the sky. Adapter Sada! Stormtrooper Suzuhara! And then they pointed aside. And that over there is Shinji Ikari! There was an "Ooh!" all through the deck. Shinji waved back slowly, embarrassed. Needless to say, Asuka was beyond pissed, and the other Evangelion pilot had even yet to actually do anything. The mess hall was completely empty. The nerve people sat all in one table, with cups of coffee at the ready. The crew tried to look on unobtrusively from beyond the door. Misato twitched in irritation, as Kaji prodded her again with his foot. Asuka twitched in irritation, as Kaji asked Misato if she was seeing anyone. The purple-haired woman tried to ignore it all. I was careless. I should have been prepared for this. She tried to leave as soon as she realised Kaji was on board, but the transport copter had already left. The UN had already had as much as they could take of being Nerve's delivery service.
It's our luck.
Kaji grinned lopsidedly.
How have you been, Misato?
Well enough. The grizzle-chinned man leaned back on his chair, giving up finally as Misato continued to refuse provocation. She looked so cute when she was so obstinate. He looked to the side at Asuka's pout, then passed her to the teen who looked on in amusement.
So, you find us adults funny as well, eh, Shinji-kun? So, you're the one living with Katsuragi now?
He asked. The young teen had none of Gendo's hard angles and merciless nature. On the surface, at least, Kaji in the point of nature versus nurture was firmly on the nurture side. Yes, Shinji replied, looking all so innocent. Kaji put his elbows on the table and linked his fingers together. He suppressed his grin.
So, is she still so wild in bed?
Everyone but Shinji recoiled. What are you implying? Misato leaned across the table and shouted to Kaji, red-faced. How dare you say that to these kids? The man grinned.
So, she hasn't changed at all, has she, Shinji-kun?
So she was always like that? The pilot responded. He shuddered. Wild? Think you mean dirty? Everyone reared back again. Huh? Shinji took a sip of coffee to calm his nerves. I try to keep it under control outside, but in her room, she just drops her clothes right there and expects me to clean it all up when I'm done with myself. I try not to touch too much of her stuff, but it's just hard, daily effort to keep it all from spilling out into the street. Misato-san really has no self-control whatsoever. Kaji's elbow slipped, sending his face into the table.
Massacre!
Shinji! Misato screamed. What are you saying? You're such a liar, third child! Asuka shouted, standing up and pointing at him. Just what are you trying to pass yourself as? Misato opened her mouth to speak, then shut it. Damn it, damn it, damn it! She began to punch down at the table. Her expression was hollow as she looked up. As far as I've known Shinji, he just doesn't lie. I can't deny the exact literal truth of what he just said. Kaji began to lightly thump his head on the table.
Well, this is unexpected.
He got up and laughed weakly as he tried to preserve some dignity.
You are a god among men.
Toshi looked wide-eyed at his friend. You've gone up to paradise and in return of your own will. The two teens pressed their foreheads to the table in a bow. Shinji-sama! This is a nightmare, muttered Misato, clutching her hair. Needless to say, Asuka was starting to approach critical pressure. Outside on the bridge superstructure, Kaji casually leaned upon the railings and asked,
So, what do you think of Akari Shinji-kun?
He looks boring! I can hardly believe they let someone like that become the third child. Asuka grinned slightly. Unless you believe all that about him and Misato. Kaji coughed. Point to Asuka.
Be that as it may, he did pilot an Evangelion to combat, and without prior training defeated an angel.
It's just luck. What was his sync ratio? Kaji was silent. He'd been dreading that question. Kaji?
He doesn't have the same control over his sync ratio like you do, Asuka. It's also erratic, both in and out of combat.
What's the best he could do then? Kaji winced, then sighed. He owed it to Asuka, at least, to find a way to prepare her for the demands of actual combat. Things would be very different once on land.
Against the second angel, he reached a peak sync ratio of 137%.
Asuka nearly fell overboard as she swung lightly using the railing. No way! That's almost double! No way! Impossible!
Don't worry about it. Those two with him, they were inside the entry plug when he fought, so it's believed they managed to combine their sync ratios into something.
He didn't mention how that was necessarily harder to do than just simply fighting alone.
They don't have a sync ratio high enough to really rate them as Eva pilots, but every little bit helps.
Asuka grit her teeth. Now not only did she have Shinji preemptively stealing her thunder, she had to deal with those two buffoons as well. What's his average? Her voice was icy.
Asuka,
Kaji! What's his average sync ratio? The man sighed again.
Inside or outside of combat? It's like Shinji Ikari is two people in or out to the Evangelion.
In combat! She turned around and her eyes were misted. Tell me, Kaji! The man groaned and rubbed his face. He exhaled. Fine.
100%. That boy's an angel-killing machine. Can't you be happy in that you still have a shot at having a normal life?
It is necessary to say, Asuka was ready to kill. She didn't even wait for the escalator to reach the top. She stomped down, pushing aside Masato and grabbed his hand. Come with me, Fairchild! She shouted. I have something to show you! She dragged him off, uncaring of his weak protests about how sudden it was.
Wow, said Toji. Just wow.
Shinji-sama works quickly. Kensuke clapped his palms together. Hail Shinji! Toji copied the motion.
Hail Shinji.
Masato began to thump her forehead against the sides of the stairwell. Shinji merely looked on, as if invisible, as Asuka managed to browbeat around some crewmen into providing a way for her to transport the two of them into the container ship. A speedboat might not have as powerful an engine as the carrier, but it also had much less mass to move. She shouted at the driver to hurry even so. He thanked, in his odd English, the driver of the launch as the two pilots left. The dark sunglasses-wearing man merely grunted in response. Permission to come aboard? Asuka growled dangerously. Granted, said the officer on deck. I don't get paid enough for this shit. Shinji ran to keep up as they slid under the heavy tarp covering. Finally they reached where they needed to be. It lay upon a hold filled with purple cooling liquid. Interesting, he said. I didn't really expect Evangelion Unit 2 to be red. That's not the only difference! Asuka exclaimed. She was actually impressing Shinji thus far. The surface of the Evangelion was smooth and curving, and yet she managed to get up to its highest point so quickly and without fear. He never met anyone so exuberantly physical before. After all, Units 1 and 2 are prototypes, test models in the development process. The fact that it's synchronized with you, an untrained boy, is good proof of that. She waved down. But this is Evangelion Unit 2, the first on Earth built for true combat, the final model. This is the true weapon of humanity. Shinji smiled and nodded. What a girl. Just being around her made everything seem so alive and colourful. It was as if she was his direct literal opposite. He looked around. Almost immediately, the ship shook suddenly. His posture didn't waver even slightly as the small pontoon bridge wobbled. An explosion? Asuka asked aloud. An angel, Shinji said simply. Another shockwave rocked the ship. Ha! You Her expression brightened. Yes! Yes! This is perfect! Shinji frowned. This isn't good. Explosions began to happen all around. The deck officers shouted out commands and reports. All ships, check distances between other ships and take evasive manoeuvres. Over the Rainbow's first Ulver clutched his radio, while the Commodore, also acting as ship's captain, took survey of the situation. Report. Simbel is sinking! Titus Andronicus hasn't confirmed the target! Came back over the comms. Damn it! What's going on? At full speed, they were pulling around 40 knots. Something out there was easily swimming circles around the formation. Ships barely had any warning before they were sunk, killing all on board. Hello? Miss Addo leaned against the bridge hatch. Nerve delivery! You ordered data and countermeasures against this invisible enemy, right? This is a battle, responded the Commodore, not even moving from his watch. Only authorized personnel allowed on the bridge. Kensuke peered from behind her, his camera ready. Masato grinned. From what I can tell, this is an angel attack. She lost that grin as she felt the carrier shake again. The flash of another explosion changed shadows on the bridge. All ships fired at will. Torpedoes and missiles launched, homing in at the fast-moving enemy. All they could see was its breaking rave, and it simply rammed the frigate to send it into an explosive death. Nobody had any time to initiate any form of AVAC. Useless, muttered Kensuke. That sort of thing's useless against the AT field. Ships began sinking one after another. Oh, those poor machine spirits. Toji shouted into the bridge. We need the Evangelion. What the? Get those children out of here, the ex-soul shouted back. All along, nothing could even so much as slow down Gaghiel. Misato bit her lip.
Why is the angel attacking here? Is it after Unit 2?
Asuka continued to drag Shinji around. At passing a stairwell, she halted and let go.
Stay here a second,
she commanded, a big red bag slung over her shoulder. Shinji leaned against the doorway. He closed his eyes and felt the battle happening all around him. Unexpected, truly unexpected, but at the same time fortunate. He so desperately needed something to tear apart with his bare hands. He still felt a little dead inside. Asuka screamed, "Don't let..." then frowned. No, there wasn't anyone there after all. It was like he wasn't even interested. What an irritating boy. She stomped back up the stairs and threw her spare plug suit into his arms. "So you're already preparing for battle? Very commendable of you," he said, grateful.
"Don't talk so high and mighty around me,"
she growled.
"Now, follow!"
Asuka stood over an opening entry plug while Shinji waited below. He had his arms crossed over his chest, uncomfortable at how the protrusions of the plug suit felt. "Shouldn't we ask for permission first?"
"I'll ask for it after I win."
"Good answer, Soryu-san." Shinji laughed. No fear, no hesitation. "Good answer."
"I said stop it!"
she screamed down. Once inside the Ava, she began the startup sequence. Then red filled the interface. She grit her teeth.
"It's your fault!"
she shouted to the other pilot clinging to the plug mechanisms behind her.
"You're disturbing me with your fart noise!"
"I'm sorry, Soryu-san."
"Why can't you think in German?"
Shinji closed his eyes. "The only word I know is... Krieg is German, right?" He opened his eyes and said out loud with an open smile, "Krieg!" Still lying on its pool of coolant, Unit 2 opened its mouth and roared. Shinji blinked, wide-eyed. The red error marks faded. "That was... Your Evangelion is such a beautiful machine spirit, Soryu-san. So eager, so compliant. Truly, she has been blessed." He wondered if she had named it yet. The failure signals returned a few moments later.
"What? Dunkoff!"
She frowned and closed her eyes.
"Fine! Switch base fort language to Japanese! Evangelion, start! Rise, doll!"
she commanded. "Evangelion preparing to launch!" came the report over the bridge. "What? Stop it! Reset the activation sequence!" Misato fought the comm line away from the Commodore.
"Asuka, nice! Prepare to launch!"
"I haven't relinquished command yet!" The Commodore wrestled it back. "Both the Ava and pilots are still under our control. I do not authorize this launch."
"Is this a time to be worrying about procedure?"
Misato shouted into its face.
"You can't be serious. Unit 2's still carrying B equipment," added the first officer. "If it falls into the sea, it's all over."
"As long as it doesn't fall, we're okay,"
Asuka said back. "We're all right, Misato-san. It's incoming!"
"Shinji, you're there too?"
The nerve officer grinned.
"Okay."
"The time for talk has ended," shouted Kensuke, his hood up. "Now we must fight!" Everyone on the bridge turned to look at him, who was concentrating upon the Ava in the distance. "Go, Evangelion!" he whooped. "We believe in you!" The Angel smashed into the container ship. "Othello is sinking!" came over the comms. The Evangelion had already leapt by then, and onto another ship.
"Yeah!"
shouted Asuka.
"We're going!"
Crunch. Dramatic stance. Did we just land on someone's bridge?
58 seconds! I can make it!
The Evangelion looked around and leapt again just before the Angel struck.
There!
It began to leap from deck to deck, ship to ship, Asuka's excellent 70% sync ratio having it respond flawlessly. Shinji was silent. She doesn't know. "So this is what battles for you, Asuka?"
"Misato!"
she shouted.
"Prepare emergency power line on deck!"
"Everyone brace for impact!" the Commodore yelled out.
"Ava Unit 2, landing!"
Unit 2 slammed into Over the Rainbow's deck, pitching the carrier almost onto its side. Plane slid off into the ocean. Kensuke filmed it all, focusing upon the Ava. As much as he thought it was a waste to lose those pieces of military hardware, it was nothing compared to the survival of all the remaining ships and their crew. He believed in the machine spirit's will to protect those that it cares for, and cared for it. Asuka picked up the plug and snapped it into the socket on the Ava's back. The timer went from almost 0 to 8888.
Switch to external power complete!
The Ava's heading this way! Masato shouted. We don't have any firearms to use against it, Shinji cautioned softly. It was the first time he'd ever gone into combat without a 5-minute limit.
A prog knife is enough!
Gaghiel leapt right out of the water and onto the deck. The prog knife fell from Unit 2's hand and began to eat into the deck. Shinji could feel Asuka's brutal joy as she grappled with it. At the same time, he thought, so, the AT field for propulsion. I already knew about this, but it's not just for flying. Is it easier on the water? Unit 2 was pushed right out of the deck and into the water. It hung slumped as the power line snagged on a deck edge.
I can't move!
Asuka said, pulling at her controls. Asuka, fighting underwater is impossible with B-type equipment, Masato said over the radio.
Pull them back now!
She shouted to the winch operators. Seeing the Evangelion, the unnatural enemy, motionless, Gaghiel swooped around and opened its maw.
Mouth!
Asuka gasped. Those teeth!
Move, damn it!
The most she could do was have the Evangelion turn its head up for a better view at the rushing horror. She could see something red and round deep in the angel's body, past the rows of big pointy teeth.
That's a core!
Shinji just sighed. What do you expect? It's an angel after all.
If you can't be useless, then just shut it!
Shinji just nodded. I see. So that's how it does it.
What madness are you going on about now?
It might be impossible to move underwater, but the light of the soul remains the same! Unit 2's eyes flashed, and just as the angel was about to bite down, managed to wedge itself into place with its teeth and arms. Yes! It does work! Good reflexes, Siryu-san! Asuka grit her teeth and shouldered all the pressure. What the hell? He just pushed aside all that water with an AT field? The vacuum was only preserved by Unit 2's field meshing with the Angel's own propulsion AT field. Nothing that big should theoretically be able to move with the same speed and efficiency as a screw propeller. Anyone who could look would have seen the Evangelion wearing as if a second silvery skin as water boiled under the sea. This doesn't solve our problems, though. The Angel dragged Unit 2 around, smashing it into the sunken buildings of what was once old Tokyo. River channels underwater are like trenches, and briefly Shinji considered what might be done with them. But that lapse of concentration cost them. Asuka grunted as the Ava's muscles faltered and their hold nearly slipped.
Cable length!
Masato shouted. 1,200 meters, remaining, someone answered. The Evangelion slammed into a few more buildings. At least this time he wouldn't be so blamed for destroying a city. We need to do something, Shinji murmured. Then, Toji! He shouted to the bridge. Find Kaji! The young teen snapped into a salute and left running. Escape by yourself, Gendo had said. Kaji could cheerfully shoot the old bastard if he ever had to, but he actually worked with Gendo well over the years. There were a few others that could be trusted with the package from SEAL headquarters itself. In his own way, Kaji respected the bastard for being able to play the game so well. It took some time and some thought, but at last he was prepared. He wobbled in place as the ship lurched again from the Angel's violent motions.
Well, this is getting dangerous,
Kaji said to himself. He patted the sealed case. If Shinji could only just see it, he would have realised it was all but identical to the one he'd found his Warhammer friends in, other than the more primitive lock.
We've got places to go, don't we?
He was already in the hangar, about to put on his helmet. As a UN representative, he had authority over some of the crew. He didn't need to ask the captain for permission.
And where do you think you're going?
He heard someone shout out hoarsely. He turned, only to see there one of Shinji's strange friends. Toji stood there, his arms crossed over his chest. He was breathing heavily, having had to run almost all the way across the ship. Kaji grinned a bit.
Sorry, but I can't stay. I've got something important to deliver, you see. I can't. Wait a sec, man. Be as important as this battle. Are you just gonna run like a coward? What can I do? He shrugged. I'm just a passenger here. Leave that to those who can fight.
Toji stalked forward.
Whenever Shinji fights, we don't just abandon him. We believed in him, and were prepared to die alongside him.
He stood between Kaji and the plane. The pilot and remaining crew merely looked on, waiting, uncaring of the fuel they were burning. Kaji sniffed.
How good for you. Now please, get out of my way. Even if you can't fight directly, there's still something you can do.
Toji held his fist up to his face.
You're needed here. Asuka's fighting. Can't you at least be a man to appreciate a girl fighting in your place? How could you be such a coward? Fine, I'm a coward.
This is stupid.
She's gonna win anyway, so let me pass. Does she know you think that? Yes.
He nodded.
I think so. It doesn't matter, really. I won't let a pitiful coward like you retreat from this while others are fighting and dying.
Kaji sighed and shook his head.
Listen, kid, there are bigger things in this world going on than just this little battle. I have better things to do than pander to your young little egos. Why, you...
Toji punched out, but Kaji easily caught his fist with his left palm.
You're way too young to think of tangling with me, kid. If we die here, the last thing Masato-san will see will be your back as you abandon her.
Toji hissed.
Is that all right?
Kaji's eyes widened. That brief stunned moment was enough, as Toji grabbed a handful of the spy's shirt, pulled him down and caught him with a headbutt. He fell back, clutching his nose. The team grinned.
Yeah, these helmets were really the way to go. Asuka needs you now, Mr. Ryoji. I don't care if you're the worst scum to cross the surface of this earth. As long as that girl thinks the world of you, then you will help her as far as you're able. He lifted his fist straight out. Or do I need to punch some manhood into you?
The pilot shut off the VTOL's engines. He leaned out the cockpit and likewise grinned, showing his teeth. Now this was entertaining. I may be a kid, but I'm not going to look back. Don't hesitate. Don't give up. To those who have faith, as long as the chances aren't 0, it might as well be 100.
Damn kids, Kaji spat aside. I'm Toji Suzahara, and I'm from Tokyo 3. You want this plane? Fight me. Everyone, brace! The first officer yelled out. Line limits about to be reached.
Over the rainbow wrenched to the side as the Evangelion power cord stretched to its full limit. The supercarrier moved in a small arc as the angel below pulled it further. Fortunately, the much greater mass of the carrier limited the beast, even if it used its AT field instead of any more swimming about with physical power.
Hey, what's happening?
Kaji asked, cotton wads up his nose. He entered the bridge, followed by a smirking Toji. They fought to keep their footing as the ship lurched again in response to the angel's violent motions.
Kaji!
Masato gasped. There was such disbelief and relief in her eyes. She felt a pang. So the boy was right. This just might be worth it after all. He pulled the wads out, wincing.
How are we doing?
Masato gestured outside. Wind was rushing in through the broken bridge windows.
We're doing as well as we could under the circumstances.
He looked outside.
It's not like fishing, isn't it?
She nodded.
Yes, it's...
Her eyes brightened.
Kaji!
What,
She grabbed his head and kissed him.
You utter man! You just gave me an idea!
As she pulled away, Kaji was left there, truly stunned. He looked beside him to see Toji smacking a fist into his open palm repeatedly, and smirking some more. Kaji then sighed and nodded. Yeah, you were right.
Yo, Asuka, can you hear me?
He said into the link.
Kaji!
The teen all but squealed.
You've come to see me fight!
Underwater, the glow of Unit 2's eyes became brighter. It forced up the jaws with renewed vigour.
How are you kids doing?
We're doing great!
80 field neutralisation. I'm trying to slow it down, Kaji-san. Soyu-san's handling the physical side of restraining the angel.
That's good. You're working well together.
He turned to see Misato pointing and gesturing heartedly as she argued with the deck officers.
Of course! That's the only possible result from my genius,
remarked Asuka. Misato rapidly outlined her plan. Seeing no other choice, the UN Navy began to sink 2 battleships in the path of Unit 2's dangling line. At full engine's capacity, the supercarrier could actually drag around the Angel. Man's technology was powerful too.
Remember, if you don't have the mouth open, you'll be destroyed too. Do you understand the operation?
Both pilots responded in the affirmative. 70 seconds. Open, 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 open. Their thoughts were as one. Gaghiel tried its utmost to close its jaws, but all its power was nothing. It was alone like the others before it. 2 hopes in the Ava, all the might of man in the carrier. Against that it could only struggle in futility.
We're almost there,
Misato exulted.
So, the old weapons of man still have some use, eh?
Remarked the first officer.
We're not ready to die yet,
the old man of the sea answered back. This is too easy, a small part of Shinji thought. Is it because this is a new Ava? This Angel's weak compared to those I've fought so far. What happened to how they used to learn? Open, open, open. Do they didn't attack us on their own, or are they sent out by another?
I've done it,
thought Asuka. Open, open, open.
I'm the best!
Gaghiel then sensed Adam. Its rage was replaced with sudden, remorseless purpose. Target is accelerating! It's just past Tempest! Someone reported in.
What?
Misato slammed her fists on the console.
It's too soon!
All on the bridge watched as the displayed figures converged.
We can still make it!
The Angel and the battleships met on screen. The battleships slammed together and then drifted apart. Gaghiel scraped across their bottoms. The white monster pushed on, intent only on recovering its source. It's coming here! Someone yelled. The Commodore pulled down the brim of his cap, while his first officer merely closed his eyes. Kaji felt Misato's fingers seek out his hand. He squeezed hers back and smiled.
At least I have you this time, Misato,
he thought. A few minutes could never really make up for all those years, but at the end it should be enough. At least it would be quick, compared to what humanity would have to face when the Angels won. He chanced a glance aside at the 2 boys, and found their faces still set unflinching. Damn! Shinji pulled back his consciousness, and in remembering how it was that he could both push and pull with an AT field, set a curtain of it behind him. The Angel slammed into a solid wall of water. A shockwave spread across the surface. Asuka screamed. She felt the brunt of all the pain in the Ava, and the shock felt as if it was applied directly into her heart. She began to cough. What do we do now? Shouted someone over the radio.
Shinji-kun!
Screamed Misato. On it, Misato-san! Shinji reached over to take the controls. He made the Evangelion drop its arms. Asuka screamed again as the Angel's teeth bit into the Ava's shoulders. Shinji roared out as Unit 2 reached up and grabbed at the sides of an offending tooth. The Evangelion focused on its AT field, dug in and twisted. Now it was the Angel's turn to writhe. Bluish ichor flowed around the Ava. It reared back and threw at the exposed core. Nothing. The projectile merely bounced off, though scratching it a bit. Huh, said Shinji. I was sure that would work too.
Don't cough!
Asuka began to hit his head and his back. How dare he? What for did she willingly endure all that pain?
Touch my Ava again, and I will fucking kill you! Do you hear me? I'll kill you!
Ow! Ow! Okay! He let go of the controls and put himself back behind Asuka and away from her rage.
Asuka! Shinji! What happened?
Misato asked.
This fucking psycho just tried to stab the Angel with its own teeth!
Silence at the other end.
I realise I'm supposed to say something pithy here,
said Kensuke,
but really this somehow comes as no surprise whatsoever.
Gaghiel spat out the Ava and swam in a deep curve away. It turned back but kept circling at a distance, as if at the taste of that AT field it had realised just who was in that Evangelion.
Pull the Ava back,
Misato commanded.
Hey, at least you're alive. We can always try something else.
The Commodore nodded back. without hostility.
As long as life still remains in these tired bones, we of humanity can and will fight.
At least he's not attacking the other ships anymore,
said Tolji. Hours had passed, and they even already had lunch.
We can't move either,
Masato responded.
It's like a shark. As soon as anyone moves outside of this group, it will attack. We can't let anyone get outside of the Ava's range to protect.
She took a sip of her coffee as she stared at the tactical display. One more thing she had to tell Ritsuko. Apparently, the Avas can project an AT field out to over 3 kilometers.
This is the entire Pacific Fleet here,
the Commodore growled out.
I never imagined that we would be caught so. Any reinforcements would be the same. Sending the submarines against it would be useless.
Of course, dropping an N2 mine would also be destroying the fleet.
I also doubt it'll wait long enough for another Evangelion to arrive fitted with the appropriate underwater fighting gear,
Masato added.
Principio Eternus?
Asked Kensuke, his lips starting to curve up into insanity again.
No way!
Asuka shouted over the comm.
I'll defeat it here by myself!
Asuka, it's alright. Shinji knows the AT field. You know the Evangelion.
Kaji tried to soothe his charge.
It's a good partnership.
I want this psycho out of this entry plug right now!
How many times must they say I'm sorry, Suyu-san? Misato put aside her cup.
Let's ignore the married couple for a moment, shall we?
She ignored their indignant cries.
How can we stop the angel with what we have?
Your plan was sound,
all of the Rainbow's XO had to admit.
We just lost the timing. We just forgot that the enemy isn't a fish. It has its own reasons for attacking this fleet. That makes this ship the primary target.
The old man sighed and leaned his face on his left knuckles.
It's acceptable if we draw its attention so the others can escape.
And then?
Children are too valuable. Have them picked up by aircraft. The world can try building them another Ava if that's what it takes.
So it's okay to just sacrifice yourselves?
Tolji shouted.
That's giving up too.
The old Commodore turned slightly.
You'll be on that plane too. Kids like you shouldn't die yet. The world needs that spirit.
The machine spirit of Over the Rainbow is strong,
Kensuke put in.
There must still be a way.
The Commodore chuckled.
If only we had you kids around back then. We could have destroyed everything in our path.
He looked to the sea beyond. He felt he'd lived long enough. The sea had never really been his enemy.
Then if there is... What is it?
The angel is attacking,
reported one of the monitors. So even the angel was getting impatient. As more time passed, the higher the chance of reinforcements arriving and someone breaking through.
Impolite as ever,
Masato grumbled. The angels just had no sense of good timing.
It's heading right for us! Order all other ships to move clear,
thundered the first officer.
What's its distance and heading? All around 30 kilometers and closing. It's like turning itself into a torpedo.
Masato smirked.
I see. Trying to break through the AT field of an Ava, like we did at that blue thing over Tokyo 3. I guess I did underestimate them.
So?
Kaji stood behind her. He could still escape, theoretically. However, being on the bridge and supporting Asuka earned him some respect back from Masato. Geno could just screw himself. It was where he was truly needed. There were many ways of putting one's strength into the fight.
What do we do now?
Besides, Masato was always hot when in full military mode.
What else? We go out and kill it.
The Evangelion stood at ready, its prog knife deployed. Shinji waited patiently in the entry plug, content to let Asuka direct the action. It was only her right as a true pilot of the Evangelion. He let the AT field lap at the surface of the sea, as if running his fingers through the waves. Unit 2's machine spirit truly was beautiful. It lacked the sheer animal ferocity of his Evangelion, but existed solely to protect and serve Asuka. Then he felt it. A voice, familiar and all-soul trusting. It whispered from an eternity away and deep into his soul.
It is done.
He began to laugh.
What's so funny?
Asuka asked. Nothing, he replied in between gut-busting joy. Nothing at all is funny. Psycho! She hissed again. Shinji put his hands out to the sides of the entry plug and exhaled. Please, accept this power, machine spirit of the Evangelion. I just want to help Asuka. The supercarrier began to move forward as well. Charge! Yelled Misato.
Full speed! Commanded the Commodore. All engines at capacity. Everyone brace for high-speed collision.
What are you doing? Asked Asuka, looking back at Shinji. She sat on the young teen's lap and was more than surprised at how unaffected he seemed. He looked almost asleep.
Don't worry about the small things, Soyu-san.
The angel's there. Kill it. She turned back and grinned savagely. Yes, that was her purpose after all. Over the rainbow splashed on by. It was all too close for Kensuke to record. The captain of the frigate Cragmire began to scream, "A camera! Someone get me a fucking camera!" Fortunately, there was no shortage of suicidal fools in any military. They all ran out to their decks, heedless of the danger, with whatever recording devices they could get their hands on. They brought to the world a sight that all media personalities agreed needed heavy metal with every view of it. The sight of Evangelion Unit 2, red and standing there with its prog knife pointed forwards, at the tip of all of the rainbow's bow, surfing that supercarrier on top of a massive self-propagating tsunami. Gaghiel launched itself clear out of the sea and into the air, opening its maw to its widest, as if trying to swallow it all whole. The Evangelion took 2 steps forward and gutted it like, well, a fish, and sent blue fluid leaking over the deck. It pushed through inside and found the core. It shoved the great right carcass out over the edge, leaving the prog knife embedded into the red sphere. It exploded beneath the ship. The supercarrier flew. The supercarrier fell out of the sky. It splashed down, nearly sinking, then bobbing up again. The Evangelion then landed back down onto the deck, its feet digging into the metal. Roar! "Hit me, Toji," said Kensuke, while watching the pilots arrive out onto the ship's lower deck.
Only if you hit me back, Kensuke.
Shinji stepped off the escalator to see his friends looking dizzy. "Why are you punching each other in the head?" he asked. "We're trying to forget how disturbingly good you look in that suit," said Kensuke. Shinji frowned. "This plug suit's just weird. Why is the underside of the breast a different colour than all the rest of the suit?" He tapped the protrusions. "It's almost a fleshy tone." Toji kicked Kensuke hard enough to knock him out. "Damn it!" the jock spat. He turned and saw a sailor with beefy arms. Toji walked over to him and pointed at his own forehead. "Punch me!" The sailor put up both hands and backed away. "Oh no, no way he's getting tangled up in that shit. These kids rocked hardcore." Asuka was first down to the docks. She saw Misato waiting there and walked up to the woman, grinning smugly. "Did you see that, Misato?" she said. "I'm just as good as your precious Shinji. You better watch out. I'm the best pilot for the Evangelions." It felt good. The adulation of the people for something for once she truly deserved. She could fight for that. Misato only stared past her shoulder to see Shinji in midst of victory, still looking so defeated. She felt her eyes tearing up. She could almost feel his remorse at all the people he failed to save. She looked back down at Asuka's self-satisfied grin. So, she didn't know. Or didn't care. She was gloating, and her eyes were a little unfocused, as if she was in a world all of her own. Misato slapped the girl to wake her up. "What the... You bitch!" Asuka touched her own reddening cheek. "Can't take it that someone can be better than your pet pilot! Do you think this is a game?" Misato screamed. "Do you know how many people died today? Do you know how many wives will be crying for their husbands? Do you know how many sons and daughters will never see their fathers again? Do you know how many you killed personally from playing around?" Soldiers did not die for mere pay. Asuka was taking all the credit. All those lives spent to buy her time. All the crewmen who broke bones rushing the power cable. One of the engineers ran through a wall of steam to prevent total reactor breakdown and to return power flow to the line. Just when the Ava really needed it, the flicker between battery and the external power lasted barely a second, not even noticed by the pilots. For that crucial second, he boiled to death. But it was worth it. Use of the AT field was the most draining act an Evangelion can perform. It saved several more ships as the Ava used its AT field as a shield to break Gaghiel's ramming attacks. There are even more heroes. Barely half the ships of a once great fleet remained afloat. More people died in that single battle than in all other assaults by angels on Tokyo 3.
At least Shinji understood that. People sometimes need to be sacrificed. You just make me sick. Don't insult their sacrifice. Asuka, don't think you can do everything alone.
The purple-haired woman turned away and towards the jeep where Ritsuko waited. Asuka stood there, shaking with rage, until she saw a familiar face.
Kaji!
She rushed to him.
Did you see what that horrid woman said to me? She's hateful, like that Shinji!
Kaji just sighed.
Asuka, you're a soldier now. Do you understand at last the trust that humanity placed upon you? You did great, Asuka. Misato just doesn't understand you as well.
He patted her shoulders and smiled.
But I really can't say yet that I'm proud of you.
Not until you learn your own true pride, not this fake thing you wear around you. Such betrayal in her eyes. He grabbed her shoulders and hugged her. Asuka cried into his shirt.
It's all right, Asuka, he added softly. You still have a long way to go. Hang in there. You're strong, and you can make it.
In the end, Asuka was just a girl with problems. Everybody had problems. He hoped someone would be able to help her in Tokyo 3. He knew he'd been rather useless on that end. He had no idea how to relate to a troubled teenage girl.
Kaji!
I believe in you.
It was Gendo's office. He sat there in his usual pose, Ray standing before him, again in bandages.
You sustained injury from a malfunction in the Evangelion Unit Zero's control system. As a result, you lost the past 2 weeks of memory. Do you understand this?
Ray nodded.
From now on, you are to limit your interactions with the third child to this base, and only when necessary outside. Do you understand my order?
Yes, sir. Gendo let a few moments pass. He reached into his desk and put the war boss out on the table. He still felt an odd urge to crush it, but it was just a toy and undeserving of his peak. Control was important to him, especially in himself.
You will give this back to the third child and accept no more gifts of this nature. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
You may go.
Ray took the figure, put it in her pocket and left.
Hey, Umi! Can you hear me? Hey there!
The blue-haired girl said nothing. Later, Ray faced the tank full of her clones. They all floated about, drugged up beyond measure, but nonetheless all aware of her. She could feel it, anguished fragments of her soul, only barely linked to her, and they all despised her. She was whole and they were not, and they longed to devour her, to fill her void, but she wouldn't be enough. The only one strong enough would be Lilith. It would be suicide on a grand scale to try and wake them all. Nonetheless, she felt for the first time pity. This was such vast injustice. How many of her cells had there been? She was the third, because she was the third to have the soul. How many more soulless bodies have been bought out, cut up, experimented on, exposed to all sorts of tests and depravities? She can never really know. At least one thing was certain now. Before, they could only trap her soul in a machine and choose which form she would inhabit next. The next time, the choice was hers and hers alone. She put her hand to the glass. One of the other rays drifted down and faced her. She had a face precisely like hers, but full of unknowing hatred. Her eyes saw her, and at the same time did not see. Ray tapped at the glass. The nearest ray blinked. She tapped again. Then slowly, the other lifted its fist to the glass and tried the same motion. It was a slight bump, muffled by the liquid on the other side of the tank. She tapped again. The other ray responded. The others turned their head, slowly recognizing what was happening. Tap. Bump. Tap. Another ray joined in. Bump. Bump. Tap. Bump, bump. Thump. Tap. And all, red-eyed, blue-haired girls just grinned. Gendo slipped on the floor of his office for no readily apparent reason. He snorted with irritation. Fortunately, no one was there to see it. He supposed even he must be the victim of random occurrences. He stared up at the symbols on his ceiling. It seemed to press down upon him, and he could almost hear as if from a distance a dark, chaotic voice laughing on and on. For the first time in many years, he felt insignificant and afraid.